The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler, July 6, St. Julian, Anchoret. This saint was carried away captive from some western country when he was very young and sold for a slave in Syria. For some years he much aggravated the weight of his chains by his impatience under them, till having the happiness to receive the light of faith, he found them exceedingly lightened by the comfort which religion afforded him. A right use of his afflictions from that moment contributed much to the sanctification of his soul. Not long after, he recovered his liberty by the death of his master, and immediately in the fervor of his devotion dedicated himself to the service of God in an austere monastery in Mesopotamia. He frequently resorted to the great Saint Ephraim for advice and instructions in the exercises of virtue, and that holy man went often to see him, that he might edify himself by his saintly conversation. This learned doctor of the Syriac Church tells us that he could not forbear always admiring the sublime sentiments and spiritual lights with which God favored a man who appeared in the eyes of the world ignorant and a barbarian. Julian was of a robust body, inured to labor, but he weakened and emaciated it by great austerities. He worked with his hands, making sails for ships, and wept almost continually at the consideration of his past sins and of the divine judgments. St. Ephraim tells us that he often admired to find that in the copies of the Holy Bible, after Julian had used them some days, several words were effaced and others rendered scarcely legible, though the manuscripts were entire and fair before, and that the holy man candidly confessed to him when he one day asked him the reason, that the tears which he shed in reading often blotted out letters and words. Our saint always looked upon himself as a criminal, trembling and expecting every moment the coming of his judge to call him to an account. It is easy to imagine how remote such a disposition of mind was from being capable of entertaining the very thought of amusements. His extreme humility appeared in his words, dress, and all his actions. He had much to suffer from certain tepid and slothful monks, but regarded himself as happy to meet with so favorable opportunities of redeeming his sins and of exercising acts of penance, patience, meekness, and charity. Prayer was almost the uninterrupted employment of his heart. He made in his little cell a kind of a sepulchre, where he lived retired for greater solitude whenever his presence was not required at duties of the community. He assisted at the divine office without ever moving his body, keeping his whole attention fixed on God, as if he had been standing before the tribunal of his sovereign judge. St. Ephraim assures us that God honored him with the gift of miracles. Sozomen writes that his life was so austere that he seemed almost to live without a body. Thus, he spent 25 years in his monastery, purifying his soul by patience, obedience, and the labors of penance. He passed to a glorious immortality about the year 370.